Hey guys, if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for a link to my Amazon store where I've compiled some of the very best items available, including some of my own personal recommendations. Thanks! What's going on? YouTube Middle Complex here, and welcome to episode 46 of my Sunday series, The Knife Guy. If you are new to my channel, new to this series, or you just stumbled out of some weird corner of the internet and you have no idea where you are, I'm a knife guy, knife enthusiast, knife collector, knife user, knife enjoyer of all sorts. We are all knife guys and gals in this world, at least most of the people who are watching this, and we all go down our own unique paths. We have our own unique experiences, and we end up the people that we are today, you know, because of the path that we took, right? But a lot of these paths intersect, and at these intersections are shared or common experiences, and that is what this series is all about. Oh, I didn't lock the exposure. There we go. Yeah, I like to lay out a whole bunch of knives that are either mine or some of my generous viewers who have lent them to me. And I like to just pick them up and sort of show them and open them up, flip them out, give you guys something to just sit back, relax, and watch and listen to. This series, many people know, is essentially inspired by Jim Skelton's old knife rambles. I found myself watching them, all of them, multiple times over, actually. I just enjoyed the sort of style of it, and I decided to replicate that just a little bit. So first off, again, like usual, I just want to thank my very generous patrons for continuing to support me during these uncertain times. Thank you so much. It really does mean the world to me, and it is really helping out, considering this channel does not generate the same revenue that it did given the state of things right now. And so I'm trying to keep up with content, and my patrons absolutely make that possible. So thank you so much for doing what you do. If you want to check out my Patreon and those stickers and the exclusive content, there's a link down in the description. So what are we talking about today? So a lot of times I come up with the topic of these videos by just sitting around, and I'm constantly sitting around and handling knives. I'm either using knives or handling knives. There's one in my pocket, you know, at night when my wife and I are watching our shows. I mean, it's the same thing you guys do. I'm doing the same thing. I've got a knife in my pocket, and I'm flipping it, and I'm thinking about stuff subconsciously while I'm paying attention to other things that I'm doing, or my full attention is on the knife, right? But I feel like part of my brain is constantly thinking about knives at all times. And I think this is something that we have all experienced, and it hasn't come to like the surface in our minds yet, or it's absolutely surfaced, and a lot of you guys are aware of it, and you're just like, yeah, that's just part of the travel. And this is part of the experience, and people either, you know, experience more or less of this depending on how deep they go into this hobby. And by how deep they go, I mean how expensive the knives are that you are, you know, used to purchasing. That's not an implication that like, oh, the more you know, the deeper you go, the more you know. No, not necessarily. It's just an enthusiasm, like how, you know, how much do you want to get into it, right? So I become, excuse me, I become more and more and more interested with new things, new innovations, changes to old models, right? We've got a couple of different examples out here. The Holt Spectre that's now on its fourth evolution, the new liner lock. We have the new Sebenza 31 large and small with the addition of the ceramic ball interface or lock face, whatever you want to call that. The small one's down there too. We have the Hinderer Gen 6 XM18 with the tri-way pivot system. We have an integral folding knife out here, which is not a brand new thing. The Spyderco Paysan is an integral, meaning all one piece of titanium. Not a brand new thing, but a fairly new thing, right? We've got some amazing budget knives out here. The Civivi Brigand, around the $50 price point. By the way, you can find a lot of this stuff down at my Amazon store. We've got the Tucson TS223, which is just a mind-blowing value. I think these things are like $100. Crazy. Titanium, carbon fiber, bearings, garage stops, 14C28N steel, ridiculously good action, amazing blade. This is mind-blowing, right? All of these things include innovations over, you might be wondering, why does he have the Opinel and this buck slip joint out here? So this is like the type of folding knife that I was introduced to. A lot of us were introduced to folding knives with something like this, a little pen knife, just a buck slip joint, right? Goes in your pocket and it cuts. The Opinel, still a very popular knife today, not to say that the buck isn't, but it's a fully flat ground, very thin blade. It's using the ring lock, right? And it cuts. Not the easiest knife to carry versus some of these other ones. Number one, it doesn't have a pocket knife. Number two, it's a cylindrical piece of wood. But it works, and it's probably not as, well, it's definitely not as durable, right? It's definitely, it doesn't have a blade steel that's nearly as premium. It doesn't have a lot of the same features. But it will do, if I'm, you know, being honest with myself, it'll do 99.9% of what I need it to do. Now, ask me 10 years ago. Yeah, ask me when I was like 15. What do you think of that Opinel? I'd be like, oh, cool, it's a knife. Oh, cool, it's a thing with a blade. Neat. I want this because it is a thing with a blade. Ask me now and I'd say, well, I don't like that it's made out of wood. I don't like the grindy feeling. It's very frictiony, right? I have to use two hands to open it. It's got this ring lock thing. It kind of feels flimsy and cheap. And I'm aware of all these other amazing innovations that make my other knives better than this Opinel, right? And the point that I'm getting at is that I wouldn't even have been aware of things that I now consider to be flaws on the Opinel if I had not been introduced to all of this, right? Just going to gesture to all of it. So the thing that I find funny is that advancement, you know, like technology making, you know, basically the construction of these things and how like machines mill materials or create like patterns of materials or shape materials and put them together in a final form. Like, for example, the Hinder XM18 is still a production knife. Like, this is largely made by machine to make sure that the tolerances are perfect, right? Now, some of the little final details are done by hand, especially the fitment, but it's largely made by machine. Now, if this knife were to be made back, you know, that exact knife would be made that with those exact materials a long time ago, it would be it would be worth a lot more money. Now, I understand I have to factor in inflation, but you know what I mean? It's because the cost of creation, you know, the cost of taking those materials, those raw materials, and turning them into this costs less now by contrast. And that's great. So more and more people get their hands on them. And I was introduced to this thing that would otherwise be this Underground Relic, along with many other knives that I have been introduced to. And then just listening to somebody like me, like I still watch other YouTube reviewers, listening to them talk about these things that I'd never heard of. It brought to light, oh my gosh, everything that I've been dealing with is considered a flaw. The funny thing is that it immediately, I was like, oh, well, I don't like it as much anymore. Never mind the fact that it had actually been working just fine up to that point, right? Somebody the other day brought this up because I was talking about how funny it is that we come down on assisted knives when it's virtually the same thing as the Switchblade. It's just it gives where we put our thumb to get the spring. Now, don't jump down my throat. I'm not here to discuss that. I talked about it in that other video. You can check out the knockout sprint run video if you want to hear my full explanation of that. But anyways, one of my first good knives was a Kershaw Blur. Not this one in particular. This is my wife's. And I loved that knife, and I bought it because it was a serrated black tanto, and that's the part of the knife world that I started out in, like many of us. As much as a lot of us don't like to admit. That's we've all been attracted to the serrated black tanto at the gas station before. I mean, whether you were 12 or whether you were 22, 42, you know, we've all been there. And some of us stay there, and there's nothing wrong with that. But anyways, that's where I started. And it turns out the Kershaw Blur is actually a very recommendable design still today. But it has what a lot of people consider to be not necessarily a flaw, just something that's not as good as or not as, you know, well done, I guess, is the automatic feature. Or a lot of people don't like automatic or assisted features at all. They want manual, completely manual, right? Because detents now are so finely tuned that, you know, the deployment of a manual knife is just as fast, just as easy to deploy, but you don't have the spring that technically can break. You know, I mean, it can, it's just pretty rare, or it's very old. And so less moving parts, right? Less parts is better. I wouldn't have even thought that was an issue, you know, until I heard it pointed out. And I was like, oh, that's a good point, actually. You know, 14 years down the road, if I'm, you know, stuck in the jungle with nothing but this Kershaw blur, and the torsion bar breaks, and then the knife is basically useless. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to pull the blade out and you know, find some vines and attach it to a stick and make some sort of spear, like some sort of caveman knife, right? To get out. And, you know, that's where the brain goes. Like the reason that we do that is because we see something that we like visually, and then we block everything else out, and we hear the things that we want to hear. We hear reasons to enjoy that thing or think that that thing is better over the stuff that we have grown accustomed to that has been working just fine, right? It's fine. It's you know, unless it does break. I mean, a lot of people do have. I have some experiences with some actually cheap knives that have broken. Those were real pieces of crap, right? I'm not talking about the Kershaw blur. I'm talking about junk, like made in Pakistan kind of stuff, right? Nothing against the country. I'm just saying that's synonymous with stuff that's not made very well, or knives at least. But, you know, we have some of those experiences, but a lot of times, like, I graduated into this territory, right? This territory that many would say is not necessary. In fact, I will even tell you this is not a necessary territory to graduate into. We're looking at between $400 and $700 knives here. $450, well, this is $625, $425 at base, $700 if you can actually get one direct from the maker, and about $560 for the Spyderco Paysan. All roughly in the same neighborhood in terms of classification, ultra high-end production. Yeah, I graduated there by stepping up the metaphorical staircase of, well, this must be better than this because, hypothetically, if this occurred, this innovation in this knife that belongs in the tier above the last one should take care of that, hypothetically. Well, what am I doing with my knives? I'm cutting open boxes. I'm cutting threads off of my clothes. I'm flipping them on the couch, right? It's just that feeling that the thing, you know, this innovation that you weren't aware of, this issue that you weren't even aware was an issue in the first place, has been solved, and you need to be a part of that solution. Oh man, let me tell you, let me admit to you guys. So the Hinder XM18 has this lock bar stabilizer disc. The first time I heard Rick Hinderer talk about this, I was locked in as a consumer. He told a story about trying to, and now I'm not Rick Hinderer. I'm not going to tell you the exact story because I don't know it, and I don't even know if I'm reciting it correctly. He was trying to cut the seatbelt off of somebody that had been in a car accident and couldn't get out of the vehicle. And because his adrenaline was pumping so hard, this was one of his own, it was either one of his own early knives or it was just a knife that he had. It was a frame lock, and he pushed the bar over, and it had no lock bar, not necessarily stabilizer, no over travel stop, and he bent it because there was so much adrenaline pumping. He bent that lock bar all the way over. And then he just had a free swinging blade because the thing was bent over, it wasn't going to come back. So he invented the lock bar stabilizer disc, which not only stopped the bar from moving this way past a certain point, but also in and out of the knife, right? It was absolutely fixed in that position. And me, having never handled a frame lock ever, when I heard about that, I was like, oh my gosh, what a genius thing. Now I can confidently purchase a frame lock without having to worry about a circumstance where the adrenaline pumping through my system gives me superhuman strength and I bend the lock bar all the way over. I had never even, I did barely even known that a frame lock was even a thing. Everything that I owned up to that point, right? Now this was, I can't remember when this was. I had purchased a few higher end Kershaws, maybe a Benchmade or two, before I had started lusting after Rick Hinderer knives and even really knew what a frame lock was or had even handled it, right? Now, I'm sure some of you are questioning how long I've actually been into knives, but the first time I heard about a Rick Hinderer knife was way back in late 2011, early 2012, if I'm remembering correctly. So I had not. And so I started lusting after the frame lock and very specifically the Hinderer XM18 because at the time, an over travel stop was not a thing that you got on a frame lock. And guess what? Also during this time, the frame lock was like this is the big deal. You know, I think, was the triad lock around? I don't know if it was or not. I'm sure the argument's been going on a long time. But the frame lock was considered to be an ultra beast of a locking mechanism, and it still is, right? And then right after that, shortly after that, the craze with the overbuilt massive titanium. So I had this idea in my head that I needed to get a beast of a titanium frame lock, that would solve all of my issues that I didn't have, right? But might hypothetically have in the future. Best to be prepared, right? Well, thankfully, because of technology and people like Rick Hinderer, there are things out there for me to buy, right? And so I did. Now, that's not to say that I don't agree that they're good innovations. They are. I mean, if they weren't, they wouldn't be adopted by so many of these other makers in some way, shape, or form. Now, part of that is a marketing tactic, right? They're catering to the buyer portion, right? The enthusiast user, like what people want. Give people what they want. This is what they want. People want 20 CV titanium frame lock flippers on bearings. Let's build them a bajillion of them, right? And we have that now. I mean, gosh, look on the table. Like 75% of the knives that are on my table to the left, there are a lot of knives over here, are titanium frame lock flippers, right? But yeah, that's what happened. Now, I do think that they are good things, right? Now, there is a good reason to carry a frame lock on bearing. I mean, one of the things is that, you know, when you get used to the design of a really good titanium frame lock flipper, one-handed manipulation of this thing is, I mean, like, it's not comparable. My hands are more used to flipping and manipulating titanium frame locks than anything else. And because there's this general conformity or this sort of gravitational black hole effect that happens with a really, really good design, is that a lot of other makers sort of follow suit and do the same thing. We've all kind of, our hands are very practiced in this, right? A lot of the designs end up being, you know, similar in terms of manipulation, maybe different in overall shape and appearance and blade steel and materials and blah, 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 right? But it's roughly the same sort of feeling when I'm manipulating a titanium frame lock. This is a button lock, right? But I know what to expect in terms of detent, disengagement of the lock bar. The reason I'm saying that is because there is a point can be made for convenience, right? Now, you don't necessarily have to spend $400. There's good frame locks to be had for much less money, but a thing can be said for convenience, right? It's a strong locking system, perhaps not the strongest locking system out there, but it's very, very convenient and easy to manipulate. And that's part of the whole utilitarian spectrum that I talk about when, you know, I EDC a knife. I want the knife to come out of my pocket easily. I want to be able to deploy it easily. I want to be able to disengage it and put it away with one hand with minimal movements. Because it's a tool, and sometimes I just need it to be a tool, and I don't need it to be this shiny thing, this shining, glowing, golden, oh, you know, I don't need it to be that, right? It can be that on my couch when I'm, you know, hydrating on a Saturday evening. But, you know, and all other times, sometimes it just needs to be a tool, right? So there is good reason for that. And there's good reasons for, you know, higher end steels, for titanium lock bar inserts. There's pros and cons, right? As is the case with everything. Justification to spend more or less money is there or not there for different people. It depends on who you are. But it's funny, had I never heard of a titanium frame lock, even if they did exist, had I never heard of it, had I never heard of the lock bar stabilizer, perhaps I get my hands on a frame lock that doesn't have, because here's the truth. I do have a couple of frame locks that don't have over travel stops. This Red Horse Chopper is a monstrously overbuilt frame lock. Guess what? No over travel stop. The pocket clip is resting on the frame and it helps put excess resistance once you get to that point. But if I really wanted to, I could probably bend that over. I use that knife every now and then, and I use it pretty hard because it was a gift from Jeff, and I probably will never let it go. I won't let it go. And I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I felt like I was going to accidentally, you know, push that bar so far over that I'd bend it, right? So was that necessary for me? I don't think so. I don't think I'll ever really need that to be there. Am I glad it's there? Does it make me feel good about it? Yes, especially considering how much that knife costs. So there's a whole bunch of and that's not really an example of a really insane innovation. In fact, talking about innovative and Hinderer knives, oh, surprise! A surprise! Complex is going to talk about Hinderer knives, right? Unsub. Hinder had won that most innovative award in 2018 for the tri-way pivot system. You can switch between nylon, phosphor, bronze, and bearings. Probably at least 50% of the pocket knives I had growing up, if they weren't slip joints, they were probably running on nylon.
And I didn't know any better, and I didn't care. And I think the one that I actually broke was running on nylon. But for the most part, nylon is a lot more durable than people think. But once I was made aware that it wasn't a preferable thing and that there were options that were considered better, right? I didn't want them anymore. Right? I also stopped wanting plastic when I figured out what G10 was. I stopped wanting G10 I still like G10. I stopped wanting it as much once I figured out what that titanium could be, right? It's like the more we're made aware of newer things, a lot of us, like, we just want them because somebody explains a hypothetical benefit in a very specific circumstance for that thing or material or blade steel or whatever. Deployment device, locking mechanism, right? Innovations. Part of it is thinking of very specific people in very specific circumstances, and part of it is just getting us to buy the next thing. Now, here's the sad thing. I'm not pointing the finger at makers, manufacturers, designers. It's my fault because I'm the one who's buying it. I still have complete control. We can sit here and whine all we want. Oh, this thing, they're making this thing out to be something that it's not. This is just, it's this big show and it's really not all that big a deal. We can do that. And I've been a part of that crowd before in a few things. And then I have literally turned around and bought it because I slowly was like, well, maybe if I do find myself, hanging off the bottom of a grappling hook out of the mouth of a Tyrannosaurus Rex while I'm on top of the Empire State Building, then maybe that innovation would be. No, I'm just kidding. But, we do that. If not with knives, we do it with other things. But I found that so funny to think about. I was like, oh, gosh, it's my fault. I'm just looking for an excuse to buy another knife, right? Which is basically how I end every single Knife Guy episode. Guys, that's going to be pretty much it for today's episode. I hope that you found that at least mildly entertaining. If you did, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like. So check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on this Metal Complex logo right here and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.